The 911 call came in at 2:47 a.m. I was halfway through my night shift, sipping on stale gas station coffee, trying to fight off exhaustion. The radio crackled, and the dispatcher's voice came through, a little too clear for the hour. Unit 12, possible domestic disturbance. 14 Willow Street. Neighbor reports screaming. No response from occupants. I sighed, grabbed my notepad, and keyed the MEC. Unit 12 en route. I'd been a cop in this town for almost 9 years. Small place, mostly quiet, drunks, break-ins, the occasional bar fight. Domestic calls were the worst. No matter how many times I responded to one, I never got used to them. Willow Street wasn't far. I pulled up 5 minutes later, headlights washing over an old 2-story house with peeling blue paint. It stood alone, trees hunching over it like silent witnesses. The porch light flickered weakly. I cut the engine. Reach for my radio. Dispatch, I'm on scene. No sign of movement. Copy Unit 12. Proceed with caution. I stepped out, boots crunching on the damp gravel. The air was thick, humid, and the smell of wet earth clung to everything. Then I heard it, a muffled sob. I froze. It was faint, barely there, like someone was crying behind a closed door. I climbed the porch steps, knocked twice. Police? Is everyone okay? Silence. I knocked again, harder this time. This is Officer Calloway. If anyone's in there, I need you to come to the door. Nothing. I tried the handle. It turned. The door swung inward with a soft creak, revealing a dimly lit hallway. The air inside was stale, thick with an odor. I couldn't place something metallic, something wrong. Hello? I called. No answer. I stepped inside, hand on my holster. The house was old. The walls lined with faded wallpaper peeling at the edges. A staircase led up to darkness. To my left, an open doorway revealed a living room. A couch, a coffee table, a TV frozen on a static-filled screen. Something about the place felt wrong. Dispatch, I'm inside the residence. No sign of anyone yet. Checking rooms. Copy, Unit 12. I moved toward the kitchen. The floor creaked under my weight. The fridge hummed softly. A plate sat in the sink, half-eaten food crusted over. Someone had been here recently. Then I saw the phone. An old landline sat on the counter, its cord snaking down the cabinets. The receiver was off the hook, dangling, and the call timer was still running. 2 hours, 13 minutes, 52 seconds. The hairs on the back of my neck rose. I lifted the receiver, listened. Silence. Then, a whisper. Don't turn around. I spun instinctively, gun drawn. Nothing. The kitchen was empty. The house was still. But my pulse was hammering now, my skin cold. I exhaled slowly, tried to reason through it. Maybe the phone was just malfunctioning. Maybe some interference. Maybe a soft creak sounded from upstairs. I snapped my head toward the stairwell. The darkness at the top of the steps felt deeper now, thicker somehow. Someone was up there. I swallowed hard, steadied my grip on my gun, and began to climb. Each step felt heavier than the last. The hallway stretched in both directions, doors lining the walls. One was slightly open, light spilling through the crack. I pushed it open. The bedroom was small, a neatly made bed, an old wooden dresser, a nightstand with a lamp that barely illuminated the space. The air was freezing, and then I saw it. The closet door was open just a sliver. The darkness inside seemed too deep, too unnatural. I stepped forward, heart hammering. If someone's in there, you need to come out. Now. Silence. I took another step. The door creaked. I held my breath. Then, a voice. Right behind me. You shouldn't be here. I turned, my breath catching in my throat. The room was empty, but I knew what I'd heard. It was right in my ear, so close I should have felt breath on my skin. I backed toward the door, forcing my legs to move. Every instinct was screaming at me to leave. Then, from inside the closet, the sobbing started again. I couldn't move. It was right there, behind that thin wooden door, sounding small, broken, like a child. I swallowed hard. Who's in there? No answer, just soft, shuddering sobs. I reached out. My fingers brushed the handle. And then, the door slammed shut. I stumbled back, nearly dropping my gun. The room felt smaller now, like the walls were closing in. My breath came in sharp, shallow gasps. The doorknob rattled violently, like something was trying to get out. I backed into the hallway, slammed the bedroom door shut, and nearly tripped over myself running down the stairs. The air inside the house felt heavier, pressing against my chest. I needed to get out. I hit the front door full force, practically falling onto the porch. The second I crossed the threshold, the air changed. The weight lifted. The house was just a house again. I stood there shaking, staring at the open door. The silence inside was deafening. Then, my radio crackled. Unit 12, do you copy? I grabbed it with trembling fingers. Unit 12, go ahead. Call from Willow Street came from a disconnected number. House has been abandoned for 3 years. I felt my stomach drop. I turned, looked back at the doorway, and saw the closet door, wide open, a shadow standing just inside, watching me. I never went back to that house. I told my supervisor it was a prank call. Nothing there, no one inside. I don't know if he believed me, but sometimes, late at night, when my radio crackles to life, I swear I hear a whisper, "Don't turn around." I'm not one for superstition or any of that nonsense. I'm a cop, 35 years old, been on the force for over 10 years now. I've seen a lot, dealt with a lot, and I've never been one to get shaken by the strange or the unknown. But what happened to me last week, that's something I can't explain. And honestly, I don't know if I'll ever sleep the same way again. I'm Officer Brad Weaver, and until last week, I thought I had seen it all. Drug busts, domestic disputes, and even a few gruesome crime scenes. Nothing bothered me. You get used to it, or at least you think you do. You learn to keep your head down, stick to the rules, and not let things get to you. But then there was that call. The call I'll never forget. It started on a Wednesday night. A routine shift, everything was normal. The precinct was quiet. I was just doing my rounds when dispatch sent out a call for a welfare check on an elderly woman named Margaret Carver. She lived alone in a house on the edge of town, a place I'd passed by countless times without ever thinking twice about it. It wasn't a high crime area, but there was something about the call that felt off. The dispatcher's voice was jittery, like something wasn't quite right, but she couldn't put her finger on it. Unit 12, we need you to check on Mrs. Carver, dispatch said. Neighbors say they haven't seen her in 2 days. Her lights are on, but no one's answering the door. Nothing to worry about, right? I'd been sent on plenty of welfare checks before. Usually just a neighbor or relative who hadn't heard from someone in a while. Sometimes they were sick, sometimes they were just forgetful. Either way, it wasn't anything out of the ordinary, so I got in my squad car and drove over. When I pulled up to her house, the first thing I noticed was how quiet everything was. No cars, no movement. The house was a modest one-story home, older, with an overgrown front yard. The front porch light was on, just like dispatch said, but everything else seemed still, too still. I knocked on the door, calling out her name. No answer. I knocked again, a little louder. Still nothing. I walked around the side of the house, checking the windows. It was dark inside, but I thought I saw a faint figure sitting in a chair by the window. I knocked one more time, this time with more urgency, but there was no movement. I could feel that pit in my stomach. Something was wrong. It's hard to describe, but there was this heaviness in the air, like the house itself was holding its breath. Maybe it was just me being paranoid, but something about it didn't sit right. I radioed into dispatch to report that no one was responding, and I was going to break the door down. They gave the go-ahead, and I prepared myself. If it was just a sick old lady who'd fallen asleep, I'd look foolish, but better to be safe than sorry, right? The door came down easily. I stepped inside, calling out again, but there was no reply. The house smelled old, dusty, musty, with that faint odor of decay. I checked the living room, the kitchen, the hallway, and finally made my way to the back of the house. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks on me in the low light, but no. There, standing in the middle of the hallway, was an old woman, Margaret Carver. She was dressed in a worn, faded housecoat, her back to me. Her hair was white, straggly, and unkempt. But what caught me off guard wasn't her appearance, it was the way she was standing, completely still, not a single movement. "Mrs. Carver?" I called out cautiously. I took a step closer, then stopped, my foot hovering midair. Something about her didn't look right. She didn't even seem to breathe. "Mrs. Carver?" I repeated, my voice more insistent this time. I took another step, slowly, the floorboards creaking beneath my boot. When I got close enough, I reached out to tap her shoulder, but before I could, her head snapped around. I recoiled, stumbling back in shock. Her face, it wasn't her face. It was a mask of flesh, stretched too tight, with hollow, sunken eyes and a mouth that twisted unnaturally wide. A grotesque mockery of a smile. I froze. My brain couldn't comprehend what I was seeing. It looked like a person, but it wasn't. She opened her mouth, and that's when I heard it. A whisper, just above a breath, but somehow clearer than anything else in the room. Leave. Now. I couldn't move. My legs were like stone. The air felt thick, suffocating. The house was holding its breath, waiting. I could hear her breathing, shallow, rasping. It was almost like she was waiting for something, or someone. I don't know how long I stood there, my body locked in place. But suddenly, the front door slammed shut, as though a gust of wind had blown through the house, though there was no wind. It felt as if the entire house had just snapped to attention. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. That's when I finally forced my legs to move. I ran. I bolted out of that house, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't even stop to check if the woman was following me. I didn't care. I got in my squad car, locked the doors, and sped away without a second thought. The only thing I could think about was getting out of there. When I got back to the precinct, I radioed in to report the situation. I expected someone to check the house, to find something, anything that would explain what I saw. But when backup arrived, the house was empty. Mrs. Carver was gone. No signs of forced entry, no traces of anything out of the ordinary. It was as if she had never been there at all. I don't know what I saw that night. Maybe I'm losing my mind. Maybe it was some kind of psychological trick, a hallucination. But the fear, it hasn't left me. I still hear that voice sometimes, in the back of my mind, whispering, "Leave now." And every time I close my eyes, I see her face. Not Margaret Carver's face, but that thing that wore her skin. I don't know if I'll ever be able to walk into a house on a welfare check again. Every time I drive past that street, I feel my stomach churn, because I'm afraid that next time, it might be me who's standing there, staring into the face of something that shouldn't exist. The call came in at 3:12 a.m. 911. What is your emergency? Silence. A heavy, ragged breath filled the receiver. Then a whisper so faint I almost missed it. Help me. Ma'am, are you in danger? What's your location? Nothing. Just breathing. Shallow, uneven, like someone trying not to be heard. Then, just before the line cut off, he's inside. I was 2 years into my job as an officer in the department. The kind of small-town cop who responded to noise complaints, drunken brawls outside of bars, and the occasional car break-in. I'd seen some rough nights, sure, but nothing I couldn't handle until that call. Dispatch traced it to an address on the outskirts of town, 48 Primrose Lane. I knew the place, abandoned for years. The neighbors whispered stories about it, how the last family just vanished one night, how squatters sometimes used it as shelter. But I didn't put much stock in ghost stories. Unit 4 responding, I said into the radio, flipping on my cruiser's lights. It took less than 10 minutes to get there. The house was as I remembered, 2 stories, slumped under years of neglect. The yard was overgrown, the mailbox broken, its door hanging open, but the front door wide open. A cold wave crawled up my spine. I stepped out of the cruiser, hand resting on my holster. Police. Anyone inside? No answer. The wind pushed against the old wooden frame, making it creak. I stepped forward, and then I saw them, footprints, fresh in the dirt leading inside. I radioed dispatch for backup. They said it would be at least 15 minutes before anyone else could arrive. Out here, that might as well have been a lifetime. I shined my flashlight inside. Dust motes floated in the beam, swirling in the dead air. The place smelled of rot, mildew, something worse underneath it. Then I heard it. Soft, scraping, from upstairs. It was a familiar sound like furniture dragging across the floor, slow and deliberate. But there was something off about it, something wrong. I stepped inside. This is the police. If anyone's here, make yourself known. Nothing. Just that scraping. It stopped for a moment, then started again, louder. I climbed the stairs, my heart hammering. The hallway stretched in both directions, but only one door was open, at the end of the hall, the master bedroom. I moved forward, stepping carefully. My boot touched something on the floor, a wet smear, blood. My breath hitched. It led to the open door, disappearing into the dark beyond. I pushed the door open with my foot. The room was empty, just an old bed frame, a broken dresser, the closet door slightly ajar, and then a whisper, right behind me, "Don't turn around." I spun, gun drawn, but there was nothing, just empty air. My pulse pounded in my ears. I swallowed hard, forcing my breathing to slow. Then something moved inside the closet, a scraping sound. Slow, deliberate. I raised my flashlight, shining it into the crack between the door and the frame. A single eye stared back at me. I fired. The shot exploded through the room. The closet door burst open, slamming against the wall. I staggered back, heart in my throat, but there was nothing inside. Just an empty closet, dust swirling in the air. I stumbled, ripping the doorframe. My body was ice cold. I knew what I saw. I knew it wasn't my mind playing tricks. Then my radio crackled. "Unit 4, status? Backup is 4 minutes out." I swallowed. All clear, checking the rest of the house. Lie. I didn't know why I lied, but I knew one thing. I had to get out. I turned back toward the door. But the hallway, it wasn't the same. The wallpaper, once peeling and stained, was fresh. The light fixture that had hung loosely was now bright, warm. And the house, it wasn't abandoned anymore. Downstairs, I heard voices. A woman laughing, a child giggling. The smell of something cooking, rich and buttery, filled the air. My head swam. My stomach twisted. I stumbled forward, gripping the wall for support. My vision blurred. And when I blinked, I was standing in a pristine hallway. The family photos lined the walls. The floor was polished hardwood. It was as if the house had never been abandoned. And then, from the kitchen below, a voice called out, "Ani, dinner's ready." I felt something shift in my mind. A deep primal terror sank into my bones. I knew that voice. It was mine. I turned and ran. The stairs stretched longer than before, twisting downward. The air thickened, pressing against my chest. I hit the bottom floor and stumbled into the kitchen, and froze. A woman stood at the stove, back turned to me. She hummed softly, stirring a pot. A little girl sat at the table, her small hands folded neatly. She looked up at me, smiling. "Daddy, you're home." I took a step back. "Who?" The woman turned. It was my face, staring back at me. I choked on a breath. My own eyes, my own features. And then she smiled. Wide, unnatural. "Aren't you going to sit down?" she asked. Her voice was smooth, familiar, but something beneath it rippled, like there was another voice just beneath the surface trying to break through. I bolted for the front door. My hands clawed at the knob, locked. Behind me, footsteps, slow, unhurried. "You can't leave," she whispered. "You never left." Darkness closed in. The walls seemed to breathe, pulsing in and out. I felt hands cold, pressing against my skin, pulling me back. I screamed. And then, light. I was outside. The house was empty again, dark, abandoned. My radio crackled. "Unit 4, do you copy?" My breath came in gasps. I staggered back to my cruiser, hands trembling as I keyed the mic. "Dispatch." My voice was raw. "House is clear. No sign of anyone." Another lie. I didn't look back as I drove away. I didn't report what I saw, because if I said it out loud, it became real. But sometimes, late at night, I hear it in the static of my radio. A whisper, "Help me." And I know the call never really ended. I never thought it would happen to me. Not someone like me, a cop. You always hear about it, other officers, those cautionary tales they share in the locker rooms and the whispers at the precinct. But it's always just stories, right? Nothing more. Until it happens to you. I guess it started the night I had to work a shift that should have been my day off. One of those just fill in for someone. Just this once moments. I was more annoyed than anything. It was late. The department was slow, and I was looking forward to nothing more than getting home and crashing out in front of the TV. But you know how it is. The calls never stop. I'm Officer Tim Green, 36, and I've been on the force for nearly 10 years. I've seen it all: drunks, junkies, petty criminals. I used to think I could handle anything. I still do, but last night made me question everything. I was assigned to patrol the east side of town, an area I knew like the back of my hand. It's quiet at night, mostly empty streets with the occasional car or pedestrian. That's how I liked it, no surprises. Just the hum of the radio and the occasional shift change chatter on the line. It wasn't until I got that call that things started to unravel. It came through on the radio. Unit 7, we have a 1055, possible suspicious activity at 1326 West Collins Avenue. Perimeter check requested. Now, West Collins is a part of town that's been slipping for years. Abandoned houses, old businesses boarded up, and an overall sense of decay. Nothing ever really happens there, but when a call comes in, it's always something to check out. I flicked the siren on and drove over, hoping it would be something harmless. Maybe a couple of kids sneaking around after curfew or someone looking for trouble. I pulled up in front of the building at 1326, and the place looked off. It wasn't anything unusual, just a dilapidated old factory, but something about it felt wrong. The streetlights overhead flickered, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. I radioed dispatch that I was on scene, but they didn't respond right away. The air was thick with silence, except for the distant hum of an old vending machine somewhere inside the building. I hesitated, then stepped out of my cruiser, hand resting on my holster. The wind blew a piece of paper across the street, scraping it against the sidewalk like it was trying to tell me something. My breath came out in short bursts, the chill of the night seeping through my uniform. I walked toward the front door, cautiously eyeing the windows, where I could barely make out movement, just a shadow darting across the glass. I couldn't tell what it was, but my heart started racing. Maybe it was just an animal, but something about it made me stop in my tracks. I had my flashlight ready, its beams slicing through the darkness, illuminating the peeling paint on the walls and the rusted metalwork of the factory door. There was no sign of forced entry, no broken glass. It looked normal, almost too normal for a place like this. I tried the door handle. It opened with a squeak, creaking as if protesting my presence. The smell hit me, then musty, like old books and mildew, but underneath that, something else. A metallic tang, almost like blood, but sharper. My stomach churned. I had been in plenty of abandoned places before, but this one felt different. I called out, "Anyone in here? Police!" There was no answer, just the echo of my own voice bouncing off the cold walls. I hesitated again, but pushed the door open fully, stepping into the dimly lit hallway inside. The place was enormous. Dust and old cobwebs filled the corners, and the wooden floors groaned under my boots. The beams above seemed to sag, like the entire building was holding its breath. I moved further inside, shining my light around. The beam caught something on the far wall, faint writing, smeared and barely legible. "Help me." I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The writing was smeared as though someone had dragged their hand through the wall, but it was strange. The letters weren't perfectly shaped, more like a child's handwriting, jagged and uneven, with splashes of dark stains around the edges. I took another step, but the floor creaked loudly beneath me. I froze, praying no one heard it. My heart was hammering in my chest, and the silence was suffocating. Then, just as I was about to turn back, I heard it, faint at first, but then clearer, a sound, a voice, someone, whispering, "Help me, please." I spun around, searching the room with my flashlight, but no one was there. The only thing in sight were old industrial equipment and empty crates. There was a door at the far end of the hallway, barely ajar. The voice seemed to come from that direction. I knew I should call for backup, but something kept me moving forward. Maybe it was the officer's instinct, that urge to help, or maybe it was just plain stupidity. I approached the door and slowly pushed it open. The room inside was darker than the hallway, the light from my flashlight flickering as I swept it across the floor. In the center of the room, a single chair was facing the wall, its back to me. "Hello?" I called again, my voice shaking. There was no answer, just the oppressive silence. Then I saw it. In the corner of the room, barely visible at first, was a figure. Someone crouched low, rocking back and forth. Their face was hidden in shadow, but I could see the faint reflection of something in the glass. It was their eyes, hollow, empty, staring at me. I wanted to run, but something held me there. I took a step closer, my heart pounding so loud I thought it would burst. Are you? Before I could finish, the figure snapped its head around, and I was face to face with something I can't even describe. It wasn't human, not fully. The eyes were too wide, the skin too stretched, and the mouth, God, the mouth it opened impossibly wide, a gaping, jagged hole that seemed to tear at the edges of its face. I stumbled backward, my foot hitting something behind me, and I fell to the floor. The figure stood up slowly, its movements unnatural, like it was dragging its body along, each step jerky and wrong. I scrambled for my gun, but before I could draw it, the figure was on me. Its hand shot out, grabbing my wrist with an inhuman strength, and I felt its breath hot and foul on my neck. "Help me," it whispered, but the voice wasn't right. It sounded like it was coming from all around me, not from the figure itself. I managed to break free and ran. I ran out of that building, out into the night, and I didn't stop until I was back in my cruiser, shaking, gasping for air. My hands were slick with sweat as I fumbled with the radio, trying to get through to dispatch, but the channel was dead. It was as if I was alone in the world, cut off from everything. I don't know what I saw in that room, but I do know this: it wasn't just a man, and it wasn't just a ghost. It was something far worse. Something that wasn't meant to be seen. Something that would follow me no matter where I went. I haven't been back to that factory since, and I don't think I ever will. But I hear it in my dreams, the whispers, the footsteps behind me. And every time I drive past 1326 West Collins Avenue, I can't shake the feeling that something is watching me, waiting for me to come back. And I'm not sure if I'll ever be able to forget that voice. Help me. Because I can't help wondering if it wasn't meant for me at all.